if they could. If there's discussions that you need to continue, if you would just please take those outside, and let's get the doors shut and go ahead and get our meeting underway. Welcome to our Natural Resource Committee meeting. We'll let Chairman Gooch answer his phone real quick. As we get started, I have asked Representative Wesley if he would to lead us in prayer, and then after that we'll be doing the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this time I will turn it over to Representative Wesley to lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Father, we just thank you today, God, for your goodness and mercy, and we thank you for this assembly. And God, as we gather together, Lord, for the best of our communities and the state, Lord, we ask you to give us direction and help our leadership, God, to lead and guide us, Lord, and especially to help those that went through the floods and the tragedies this past year. God, that if there's any way that we can help them and fund them in any kind of way, we ask, Lord, to let us be able to hear through this body. And we thank you, Lord. We just bless our chairmen on the Senate and House side, and we just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. If we would, let's please stand to the prayer. Our pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We appreciate you all going through this exercise with us, and the decorum and the work of this committee is critical to the Commonwealth, and we take this work very, very seriously. We will get started. I'm going to yield to my co-chair, Chairman Gooch, to see if he has any comments this morning.
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Very good. And do I have any of our members that have special guests, family members, or people from the district that are here that we'd like to recognize? Anyone? I see Senator or Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to recognize one of my constituents from Pike County that's here today, Mr. Bob Shirtliff from up in Pikeville. We appreciate him being here today.
Bob, welcome to our committee. Let's give him a round of applause. There we go. I also see our Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife back there, Commissioner Storm. Good to have you with us. And anyone else have any special guests we'd like to introduce? All right, that said, let's go ahead and get right into our meeting if we could. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, at this point, ask the clerk to call the roll.
Senator Chambers Armstrong, Senator Carpenter, Senator Mills, Senator Schickel, Senator Southworth, Senator Turner, Senator Webb, Senator Westerfield, Senator Wheeler, Senator Williams, Representative Ballman,
Present.
Representative Blanton,
Here.
Representative Bowling, Representative Bridges, Representative Burke,
Present.
Representative Chester Burton, Representative Dossett,
Present.
Representative Dotson, Representative Flannery,
Present.
Representative Fugate, Representative Gentry, Representative Grossberg,
Present.
Representative Johnson,
Present.
Representative McCool, Representative Miles,
Here.
Representative Smith,
Present. Oh, sorry.
Representative Wesley, Representative White, Representative Williams, Co-Chair Smith,
Present.
and Co-Chair Gooch.
All right, very good. We do have a quorum. So this time we actually will have to approve our minutes. So if I have a motion or second for the approval of our minutes, have a motion by Representative Fugate. Do we have a second? Second by Tom Odell or Representative Smith. Oh, Dotson. Very good. At this time, all those in favor sign of aye. Opposed likewise. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover, and we want to make sure we give everyone a duly amount of time. So the LIHEAP program block grant application is going to be up first. If we have our guests that want to come to the table. As you all come to the table, make yourself comfortable, and then please identify yourself for our records.
Good afternoon. My name is Todd Trapp. I'm the director of DCBS's Division of Family Support.
Good afternoon. I'm Roger McCann. I'm the executive director of Community Action Kentucky.
Good afternoon. My name's Laura Began. I'm with the Department for Community-Based Services, and I'm just here assisting with the slides today. Thank you.
Very good. Well, welcome to our committee, and we'll go ahead and turn it over to you at this time.
All right, thank you. Again, my name's Todd Trapp. I've been with the department, I guess, let's see, about 33 years this past summer. I've really worked with LIHEAP over the last 10, 12 years of my career. And so, I'm sorry. I get that every time. You'd think I'd know by now. Thank you. So I've got a lot of experience with LIHEAP. So the department administers the LIHEAP program, is responsible for doing so. The Division of Family Support is within the Department for Community-Based Services under Lisa Dennis, our commissioner. So we administer the program through a partnership with Community Action Kentucky and the 23 community action agencies statewide, serving all 120 counties. So LIHEAP was established in 1982. It's essentially a safety net program, and it primarily can help meet the home energy needs for low-income households. You see here we've spent so far this FFY $60.6 million. We still have some funding set aside for the last quarter of the FFY, and then we anticipate the federal funding for 2024 to be $58 million, and that's 100% federally funded. So LIHEAP, 90% of the benefits have to be spent. 90% of the block grant, I should say, has to be spent on benefits. So we're limited to 10% for administrative costs. We set aside 15% for weatherization activities, and again, that 15% is subject to that same 90-10 split. So, and then $64,000, that's set aside. That is straight benefits, and that is the Division of Protection and Permanency has that to for child welfare uses to help prevent any need for an intervention if that can be used to do so. Here's the income scale, basically for household size 1 through 8. It's 150% of the federal poverty level. And then the benefits. Essentially, there are a couple of kinds of benefits. There's the monthly payments, which can assist with households' monthly utility bills. Those are split into a couple of different types. One is subsidy. We'll talk about those a little bit more. And then crisis, and then emergency assistance, which is provided by the agencies for those households experiencing extreme emergency outside of just that bill payment. And then weatherization activities, which, as I said, we set aside 15% for that. So the subsidy component, it's basically any household that has a verified expense and meets the income limits. It's a credit to their bill, a credit or a payment on their monthly bill, and it's based on their percentage of poverty. And then generally that runs for the heating program November through mid-December, or until the allocated funding runs out.
Well, Tom, let me ask you a question here while we're thinking about this. So over the years of where I'm at down in Eastern Kentucky, what we would see is the vouchers. You'd be able to come to, say, a local gas station or some convenience store and get kerosene. You all remember these days, and take it back if you had a heater. You could even get stoker coal at one time with some of the vouchers. Do we see that much anymore, or is that something that just, I know so many places have closed in our area that's not really much of an option to go and get the coal or even really get kerosene. That's hard to come by. But how much percentage of that are we still seeing out in these rural areas where they're using their vouchers for this style of heating and warming their home, for either the kerosene or coal?
Bulk fuel is still an option, absolutely. I will ask Roger if he can speak to the percentage we may see.
I do not know the percentage off the top of my head, but I can tell you that we do electricity, natural gas, and you predominantly, of course, see the natural gas in your urban areas. But as a person who grew up with propane and wood in my home. In our rural communities, we see a lot of propane and electric, of course, but wood and coal. We see a little bit of fuel oil. We do see some kerosene out there, and those are allowable benefits under the program. I agree that you're right. We've seen a lot of operations close up, so sometimes that has harmed some of our folks that used to be able to get down the road to get those fuels, and now they have to travel further. But in no case is a monetary payment made to the customer. It's always made to that vendor. So if they go and use that voucher, then that supplier will turn in the voucher, and once we receive the voucher, then we issue payment directly to the vendor. No.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was thinking, because in some of the areas, because of the flood and just the economy, a lot of those, like Glow Mart and places like that, they're closed. And so we probably have a disproportionate amount of people in those areas just this last winter that were using vouchers at a higher level than we'd seen for a while, but less places to go to. And I'd forgotten about the natural gas. And if you're elderly and you're trying to do those tanks yourself, as we saw with a lot of people in the tent, that's a pretty big deal to get them in there. And as you all know, you're not supposed to lay them down flat. You're supposed to put them in the back of the truck, which most people don't do that. But I was just wondering how much that was an issue in this last bit, and how LIHEAP handled that with the lack of having vendors available for them. And if you can answer that, and then I'll yield to Representative Blanton.
How about now?
Yes.
All right, good deal. Sorry, but while we're talking on vouchers, I wanted to jump in here really quick. So if I receive a voucher, are there any safeguards in place that ensures that I'm using that voucher in a proper manner? And if so, can you explain that?
Sure. That is a concern. We want to make sure that the benefit is being used by the person who is supposed to receive that benefit. In the case of, for example, propane, we require that the propane vendor provide some written documentation that it was delivered at that house. It can't be sent to a different address. So whatever the address on record has to go there. Then if it is a voucher where someone are picking up like a bulk fuel, they have to match that name on there. So we want to see them matching the name of the receipt back to that person who had that voucher and presented it, and make sure that those things line up. So we definitely want to reduce any sort of the benefit going to the wrong person. I have a true distaste for somebody who wants to misuse a program like this, because when they do that, they could be taking away from somebody who is deserving. And so if we do find those instances, we investigate them or we turn them over to the OIG.
Thank you, and I totally agree with you. There has been, there's oftentimes conversations dealing mostly with the kerosene part, where people will get the vouchers and then they'll sell their vouchers. Or, so are the people that's taking the vouchers, are they required to get some type of ID from these individuals that's name is on the voucher to ensure it's them, which there's nothing to keep them from going and getting the kerosene, then turn around and selling the kerosene, right? But I know that is seems to be a fairly common issue in my area when it deals with the kerosene.
They are supposed to do that. That is supposed to be done. There is a vendor agreement that if you want to participate in the program, you have to follow certain stipulations. And I would take very seriously any accusation of that, and I would follow up with those vendor, or I'd have my folks in the field that are there to follow up with those if they're reported to me.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to interrupt.
No, very good. Thank you. Do we have any other questions at this time with understanding of it? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question relates to these vouchers because that's an area of the program I'm not as familiar with. What percentage of the LIHEAP money in Kentucky is for vouchers as opposed to direct payments to utility companies?
I don't believe I have that statistic with me at this time. I'll be happy to follow up with you, though.
Very good. Thanks, Representative Burke. And if you would provide the whole committee with that, that'd be really good to see. And Folks, listen, most of us are very familiar with your program, and we can save you all some time today. We have to actually take a motion on this, so for a finding of fact. Does he want to go ahead and present it with it? I was just going to save you all some time if you all want to go ahead with it. But
We are at your mercy, so if you
was
all know enough, then
yeah, I think
happy
we've
to
got
share.
this in our packet with it. But this is a statutory requirement for us that we approve their finding of fact. You've got the sheet and the stuff in front of you. If there is any specific questions from the committee, we'll be glad to let them ask. But if not, we can go ahead and get a motion.
I'll make that
on
motion,
this.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, very good. We have a motion, a second. All those in favor of the sign of aye. Aye. The motion is approved favorably and passes. And we'll hand this over. Thank you all for your time.
We'll follow
I know
up
you've
with
got
this.
much better stuff to do than being here with us, but it's a great program.
Thank you.
That's greatly appreciated, and your work here does not go unnoticed by all of us. Thank you all.
thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
All right, we have got now the discussion on polyfluorinated substances, or PFAS in Kentucky. I was looking for Tony. Tony, there you are. Yes, sir. Hey. Commissioner Hatton, welcome to our committee, and you guys go ahead and take the table and just have everyone introduce themselves for our record, as you know, and then we'll turn it over to you.
All right, Chairman Smith, members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you all, I think, based on some requests you've made. My name's Tony Hatton. I'm Commissioner of the Department for Environmental Protection.
My name is Larry Taylor. I'm the Executive Advisor in the Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs, and glad to see everybody here. I've worked with several of you in the past on constituent issues from the legislative perspective, but now I get to meet with you on some technical issues.
Very good, gentlemen. We'll go ahead and let you get started.
So this isn't in the first slide, but I think it's important to set a little bit of context as we move on, because I think particularly in the notification we got that you all were interested in this topic, there were, I think, some interest in what's happening at the federal level and some interest in what we're doing at a state level. I think it's important as we delve into that, and certainly we're going to have information to that effect, that we sort of set some context of what we're talking about, because this is a complex issue in a lot of ways. And so I think maybe one of the first things worth pointing out is that, you know, PFAS is compounds or things that are in commerce or in consumer products. And we are not statutorily authorized, nor is it our job to address issues related to consumer products. Our primary responsibility is protection of air quality, water quality, and solid, sustainable waste management practices. So that's important sort of moving forward to help everybody understand what our piece of this is and what we've been doing. So PFAS, for those who are engaged in my vocation or people that work in the same space that I do, is something that gets talked about quite a bit. It's commonly, they're referred to as forever chemicals or emerging contaminants. You know, it's a really long official name, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, PFAS. And, you know, we talk with folks at the national level, we talk with some of our counterparts at EPA, and what we know is, just based on our experiences, that different states are taking different approaches and have different strategies to how they're going to manage these issues in those areas for which they're responsible. Of course, EPA has a roadmap, and they've had that roadmap out for a couple of years. We also have a roadmap in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It's slightly different, and we are perhaps looking at things that we think should be considered a little bit earlier on and a little more seriously. And I'll get down to, not that they're not considering them seriously, but what's the first thing? If you want to look at an issue like this, what's your first concern, or what should it be? And where should you center your resources based on that? So there are some states that have already passed state level drinking water standards and other things, and there are some states that have decided that they're not going to do much until federal regulations, if or when they become effective. At that time, that's when they will look at taking action. So we have taken what I call a measured strategy, and I think I shouldn't say that unless I'm ready to describe what that actually means. But I really believe that our strategy is sort of middle of the road, and it's geared more towards public protection than any process right now or concentration on what regulations might be. Most people that are aware of these chemicals and some of the technical aspects of them believe that the primary potential receptor issue is through ingestion from contaminated water. If you look at what's developing out there, you really don't see a whole lot now from federal EPA on what concerns there might be related to dermal contact or inhaling PFAS, but certainly ingestion through contaminated water is viewed by most people as the most sensitive receptor scenario. And we don't disagree with that, and that's why we have centered most of our efforts towards trying to ascertain where in the Commonwealth we might have PFAS in source waters that are used for the purpose of drinking water. And I think it was important for us to start gathering information, and I want to make sure we all understand we have gathered a lot of information. None of the information that we've gathered has been or ever was intended to be used for regulatory purposes, but we primarily felt we needed to gather information for a couple of other very important purposes. One is we sort of have a duty. It's our mission to protect public health. And I don't know if I should say this or not, I'm a registered professional geologist in the state of Kentucky, and so I have a professional conscience that says I have to maybe take a look at some things that we ought to take a look at. So we're looking at it primarily from a public health standpoint and primarily from a drinking water aspect here in the Commonwealth. So that's sort of what drove some of the investigative work that we're doing. I call it investigative work. You can call it due diligence, whatever. That's really what it is. Another reason that I think it's important for us to have taken the actions that we have and gathered the information that we have is there are pending or potential federal rulemakings coming down related to PFAS, and that would affect the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, which is federal hazardous waste laws, State Superfund, and others. And in anticipation of those things coming down, we want to be positioned in Kentucky to have some level of data because we think that we're the most effective. Our agency, we believe we're much more effective at managing environmental issues in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and we want to be prepared to do that. The last thing we want to do is find ourselves in a position some months down the road, rules come into place, and we're sitting here with no information and no data. So that was another motivating factor for us to sort of prepare ourselves for when those things might come. Another important aspect of it, and we'll get to the first slide here in a second, is assuming that some of those rules are going to come down, particularly on the drinking water side. That could potentially, it's not just necessarily a public health impact, it could be a cost and implementation impact to our drinking water facilities. So we've gathered information, and I'll show you that here shortly, in large part to get out ahead of those potential responsibilities that might accrue to some of our water utilities so that we can begin to assist them early on with technical assistance and looking for financial assistance ahead of the game so that when that day does come, which it likely will, we'll be as prepared ahead of time as we can be. So on that first slide there, PFAS are they're a chemical compound, which is basically two or more atoms chemically bonded together. They were first developed in the 1940s, and they have wide use. They're used in a lot of consumer products. I've become familiar with them over the last couple of years. They consist of a carbon and fluorine chemical bond. They're chain type compounds, and by design, they're very difficult to break apart. That's the way they were designed, to be very resistant. They're heat resistant, they're stick resistant, and there are many variations of that chain, long chains, short chains. You might have an atom or two hanging out over here or there that sort of changes it, but at the end of the day, they're per or polyfluoroalkylated substances. They have been widely used in consumer products and industrial products. I mentioned Teflon and Scotchgard. Those are not the only products in which they've been used, but two of them primarily. There's a reason that your Teflon skillet doesn't stick very well and can stand up to a considerable amount of heat. Scotchgard used in many types of applications, stain resistance, things like that. It's in food packaging and paper products. Aqueous film forming foam, which is a type of foam I think that was maybe originally developed by the Department of Defense. It's very effective at putting out fires. Because it's so heat resistant, it literally, when it's applied, it covers a fire and smothers it and starves it of oxygen. So it's very, very effective. That in some industrial products as well, a variety of industrial products. And I use the phrase tenacious bond. They don't readily break down in the environment, and we're talking about things having to do with releases to the environment. They don't readily break down. And it's been our experience that when released into the environment, they're, in not such a good way, very effective at migrating through groundwater, readily migrating through groundwater because of their physical characteristics, very low solubility and ability to move. So they do also, we do know that they do accumulate in aquatic organisms.
Tony, I was going to ask you that question if I could just cut in here quick. I know
Sure.
there's an international effort on seafood. There's an issue where they're looking at how much this will have an impact on seafood and fish and different products that are made available. Now, we have our Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife here. We have a lot of people that like to fish and eat the fish they catch out of Kentucky waters. Has there been that you've talked about as far as if that's, were we seeing that in any of our fish and wildlife that you all know of, or is that something that we're going to be looking into?
Yes, we have. I can talk about that now if you'd like, Chairman, or when I get to that point.
Okay,
in
if
the
you've got that point,
presentation.
yeah, I just we'll wait till they get to that point. But
Yes.
I'm curious about that one. So thank
Yes,
you.
and we have coordinated with our friends from Fish and Wildlife on some of the information we've gathered to date.
Very good. I'll let you take over.
Oh, absolutely. So, very next slide.
To me, before we do, Senator Wheeler has a question real quick. I
Yes, sir.
apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what exactly happens? Do like the metal skillets deteriorate, leaving the hydrocarbons to go down, or the PFAS substances to go down into the groundwater, or you know, I've always had a little bit of a hesitancy about nonstick. I think, you know, just a cast iron with ceramic or steel with some, you know, oil on it works just about as good or better. But, you know, I know that there are a ton of these out there.
Well, I think, you know, PFAS in skillets, Teflon skillets, are something that people often first point to. And I think in the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at it from an impact of the environment, they're probably not a major contributor. Emissions and discharges from industrial processes are primarily where you might see the opportunity for impacts to groundwater to take place, such as, say, you had a situation where you had a fire, a tire fire or something like that, that typical application of water wasn't going to work, and you used aqueous film foam or anti-film forming foam. That's a high likelihood that will readily impact groundwater. So the consumer product side of it is something that that probably is not a big contributor in of themselves to impacts to groundwater, but certainly, you know, people have to make personal decisions about what types of products they use to the extent that they can. But yeah, over time, you know, a Teflon skillet gets heated up a lot. You might see it start to crack and break a little bit. So I'm a big fan of cast iron myself, but that doesn't really, not really important to this conversation. But
Tony,
I hope I answered your question.
We have two other representatives that have questions real quick. Representative Tom Odell Smith, I'll yield to him at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this may get in front of your
Sure, no problem.
slide, but it was a concern I came up with a couple days ago, and I wanted to address since you were going to be in front of us concerning the forever chemical. There is something that started in our state, and I think you may be aware of it, that can turn into, I consider, a catastrophic event, where our landfills dispose of the water to the local treatment facility. It's treated, and in return, the local landfill receives the slurry or sludge from the treatment facility. So it's been a cooperative effort between both of them to kind of a system that they've had over years and you're aware of.
Yes.
it's been brought up in the last few months where a water facility refused to take any more of it. And this could create a domino effect with concerns from citizens all of a sudden uprising over forever chemicals, saying forever meaning there's a long time for disposal or for it to go get rid of.
Right.
So what is the cabinet looking at to address something that's already started? And what do you have as far as a game plan to keep this from happening across the state? Our garbage bills have already doubled in the last so many years. We're starting to see a rise in cost in disposing.
Right.
And our water treatment facilities are trying to hang on with sewage being at the cost that it is. And you can't be in just sewage business and utilities anymore, or local governments. You have to have the water to offset it as far as cost.
Right.
But if they start refusing to take the water or the waste that's coming off of the landfills, and then the landfills refuse to start taking the slurry or the sludge because they refuse to take their water to treat it, what is the cabinet's position on fixing that? And do you have a statement for those citizens that have caused a water treatment to already refuse it? Can you make a public statement on giving them advice on that's probably not the best first move, is to shut down a system that's been operating for years or a practice that's been operating for years? And the reason I bring it up is because you know that it's a topic right now in my area.
Yeah.
So if you could you address that, if it's all right, Mr. Chairman? I don't want to get in front of his presentation.
Absolutely, that's why we're here.
But I also think that the members need to understand what they're fixing to face in their districts. And it could be a domino effect. Am I right? And if I'm right, could you address it for me?
Well, that's a good question right out of the gate, and I don't remember every aspect of it, so you can help remind me of it as I go along. So, industrial discharges into publicly owned treatment works is a long-term common practice. We have 26 municipal landfills in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and 25 of those manage their leachate through discharges to publicly owned treatment works. The leachate, when you have you're operating a landfill, you have rain events, the water leaches down through the waste. Landfills are required to have liner systems and leachate collection systems at the bottom of them to collect that leachate. Because so many consumer products contain PFAS, then to a degree landfills have become perhaps, I don't want to speak too much on their part because I'm not a landfill operator, but I've helped in my former life site landfills. They're receiving material sort of passively. And now they find that they have something in their leachate that is going to potentially cause a problem for the next person down the line, in this case, the publicly owned treatment work. I think the short answer to answer your question, what we're doing and what we're trying to concentrate on, there's two things to look at here. Irrespective of your view of the toxicity and the danger and the public threat posed by these, some think that it's really real and some think maybe not. Maybe it's not like that intensive. But and here's the way that I think about it, and here's the way that we're looking at it. If you assume that drinking water is perhaps the thing that you should concentrate on, and I think it is, that is an issue that's implementable. It's an achievable thing in a relatively short period of time to add treatment to your water, to your raw water, to remove these compounds before they reach the consumer. That's just technologically it can happen. It's a matter of cost, and there's going to be significant cost. Then on the other piece of it, because these things have been used so widely and they're so entrained, as you mentioned, Representative Smith, they go from here to here and back to here, that is a much longer term fix and a much more complex fix. And that's why I believe right now we need to concentrate on what we do to improve the quality of our drinking water while these other problems, while they might be a problem, don't rise to that level of concern at this point in time. And that's why I would say that we're not looking at modifying the requirements for leachate has to be properly managed. If a POTW decides not to take it, they may have reasons for doing that that I'm not sure that we have really any influence or authority over that decision being made. But what I would say to those who are interested in hearing is that drinking water is the most important thing. And we can address that, start addressing that and taking care of it while over the next however long period of time it takes to start removing or managing the stuff in the commerce train that it's in. Because that is a long-term, very complicated, currently hotly debated set of issues. So with regards to a decision that was made, I think I would have to say it's a local decision that was made. It might have been based on concerns. It might not be the risk that's actually there might not support that, but different people see things differently and have different levels of concern. And there's always that challenge of over or underreacting to anything. So that's what I would say. Our biggest concern, our biggest effort right now is to identify our drinking water sources where we can treat them before they get delivered to the customer, while these other longer-term problems are worked out over time.
Mr. Chairman, just follow up real quick. It's Somerset Utilities, the water district is.
Yes.
And if you could reach out to them, I was reached out to see, because they knew the hearing was coming. So
Right.
I'd appreciate if you could reach out to them, because I think it's very important to the members in the legislative body to know when something is starting up to maybe get it fixed before it turns into
Right.
a Pandora's box. It opens up. And I think you understand how it could.
Yes, I do.
Because if one water district decides to stop and another one does, you're going to start getting a repeat of it across the state.
Right.
And you're going to have your hands full.
Right.
And so I'd appreciate if you would reach out to them.
And we've collected finished drinking water from, I think, East Bernstead maybe, and Somerset.
Okay.
And at this point in time, that's the end use that we're most concerned about. And until then, as I've said, not to repeat myself too much, the other parts of it are so complex, they're not going to be resolved very quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Very good. This will be something that this committee will follow as well. We have several of our members that would like to speak, and so as I yield to them, just remember for etiquette and to move this along, try to come back through the chair, just as what Representative Smith did for follow-up questions, because I may have somebody else in line waiting or another question. So at this time, I yield to Co-Chairman Gooch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Hatton, we talk about the PFAS, and you've given a pretty good example of how, what kind of things cause the problems or whatever. But I heard you mention something about that they're used in firefighting for very intense heat situations. Is that correct?
Yes, for certain types of fires where when you apply water, the fire only burns hotter, then the anti-film forming foam can be very effective because it starves the fire of oxygen. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think one of the reasons that brings me to my question is that, we see a problem here and we try to fix a problem, and then yet we do other things that may actually make the problem worse. And one of the things that we've seen recently is, we have this huge shift, mostly from the federal government in a push to electric vehicles. And even in Kentucky, auto manufacturers are really trying to make that push, and we're doing all that we can to facilitate that. But one of the things that I don't think is disputed is the potential for very hot, very intense fires when those electric vehicles catch fire, to the point where the local fire departments are telling me that they really can't take the fire truck out and put those things out. We even had a situation in the Owensboro area recently where they had to call the airport and actually bring something from the airport that was used. It was a foam type which may or may not have contained PFAS, but I would suspect that it does. And you know, we're talking about a complete shift away from conventional gas-powered or diesel-powered, natural gas-powered automobiles to all electric. And we have been told that homeowners' policies may go up because if that car catches on fire in your garage, they're not going to be able to save your home in most cases. Or they're going to have to come out and use something else, and that something else probably is going to involve the chemicals that we're talking about here. And so I think that the path that we are going down is probably going to make this problem much, much worse. Hope that it doesn't, but I think that it does. And I can tell you that some of us are going to try to do all that we can to make sure that we help solve some of that before we cause you a problem that you're not going to be able to handle. Because we just saw this week where an electric vehicle caught on fire and people burn up inside of it. And that really makes me concerned as to why we would have a vice president who actually talks about how wonderful it is to put our children on buses that are electric powered that could and probably will be a hazard because of the high intense and the high probability of fires on those school buses. And I'm not going to want to do anything that would push this state down that path. But can you comment on or have you looked at that possibility of the really increased risk of fires in electric vehicles?
No, I have not. The only thing that I could say to that, Representative Gooch, is the use of AFFF foam for firefighting is still a legal activity. I think a few years ago the legislature moved to have the use of that foam for training purposes. It's no longer available. But when you get into the issue of electric vehicles and fire risk, that's really outside my bailiwick.
Certainly it's not outside the bailiwick of this General Assembly to try to head off problems before they exist. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Gooch, thank you. We will yield to Senator Armstrong at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear you when you're saying we got to focus on drinking water first. I know there's a lot of research about the health impacts of that, all the cancers, the hormone disruption. I also worry that if we focus just on drinking water without looking upstream at all of the products that are sort of the source of it leaching into our drinking water, that we're really too downstream. We're really not solving the problem. I'm also aware of some other routes of ingestion that seem problematic. So I'm thinking particularly of children's products. It's my understanding that sometimes PFAS go on linings of strollers and car seats and kids' coats and all kinds of things because kids are messy. You want to make sure things are flame resistant, and that over time those liners break down and into dust, and that kids, because of their high hand-to-mouth activity, which is developmentally appropriate, end up ingesting large amounts of that dust. And so they can end up with concentrations of PFAS far greater than what we say is problematic in our drinking water. And so I suppose one of my questions for you is, when I found out about this as a parent, that there's PFAS breaking into dust, it's getting into kids' bodies, I was horrified. I went to try to find out, does my stroller, do my kids, the things that I use with my kids, do they have these chemicals? And it's really hard to find that out. And so I was wondering if there are any requirements in state or federal law that require consumers or government to be notified about these substances. That seems to me, as the public becomes more aware of the health risks of this whole cycle of we buy these products end up in our landfills, it leaches into our water system, it ends up in our bodies, and the cycle keeps repeating itself. One step might be for consumers to just want to make choices to limit their own exposure and the amount they're putting in the environment. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to anything that might help consumers be empowered in that way.
Well, that's a really good question because it is a chain. You know, I have it in manufacturing, industrial processes. When it gets into those things we're responsible for, it's when it gets released to the environment, and then in that context or that form might be subject to exposures. I don't want anyone to think that by saying we're concentrating on drinking water first means that we're not concerned about the sources of that drinking water. PFOA and PFOS, which have to date been considered to be the two most toxic, are no longer widely in distribution or manufacturing. I think you will see over time a little bit more of an effort for the use of these materials maybe to be further limited in consumer products. You talk to some folks, they'll say, well, some of these products are essential to our ability to be able to make and manufacture things. So that's going to be an ongoing conversation. But as we get a little bit further down, you know, let me try to explain as best I can. So in the paradigm in which we work, I think of things as sources, pathways, and receptors. We are at a point in time right now where the regulatory basis on PFAS compounds has not yet been established. Once that becomes established, then sources will be something that will be probably more heavily addressed. But for instance, when we get somebody who wants to do a manufacturing process, they're going to have an air permit. They give us an application. We say, okay, what are you doing? What's going to be in your emissions? What are those things? And where they're going? And what concentrations are going to be when they get there? We usually solve those problems from starting with the S and moving to the right. In a situation where we're in right now, where there's not a lot of regulation, we felt we needed to move over to the far end of the receptor and start there first and work our way back. So we will be in the process of working our way back. The consumer piece over here that keeps adding to it, that's something that is, arguably needs to be addressed if you keep replenishing the source. But where it's at in the environment, in groundwater and surface waters, that's a much more complicated long-term process. It's not just a matter of technology. It becomes a matter of cost and liabilities. And who's responsible for what? And are they financially responsible to solve a problem that they may or may not have caused? That's why we're concentrating on that one piece of it right now, while not ignoring the other ones. But looking at it from our perspective, that's the most important thing to be doing right now. We're not tunnel visioned on that, but that's where we're at this point.
May I have a very short follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. It's my understanding that some states have already started a framework for regulating certain types of high-risk products, such as children's products, such as things that are go into the body. Mm-hmm. My question is, in the case of the children's product circumstance, is there any reason to think that a child ingesting PFAS dust is in any way biologically processing that differently than an adult drinking water? It should have the same negative impact on the body, correct?
Yeah, with lower body weight, then there's a higher amount getting into the body per kilogram of body weight, so yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you for your comments. Senator Webb, we will yield to you at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My district's been grappling with this issue for about 3 years now. A little town of South Shore on the river. And a lot of my district is on the Ohio River. We have a lot of industrial contamination, and I know you all were actively involved in trying to help us we got an appropriation announced just a week or so ago. Mm-hmm. Through appropriations legislature made. I want to thank my colleagues for doing that, because you got a town of about 1,000 people with not much going on. Been hit pretty hard economically, and this is what you're going to find with communities throughout America, particularly Kentucky, especially along the Ohio River. Henderson even had a problem two to deal with that was kind of in the news. So we've been grappling with this and pretty knowledgeable about it. And, everybody kind of blames lifestyle issues on our resident cancer rate. And it's not all lifestyle issues. We've had exposures, and if you look at cancer, organ damage, thyroid, hormonal, like it's already been mentioned, birth defects, and even high cholesterol. Our residents are impacted along those lines. So this is a big deal. And I've always felt water was our most necessary resource and done everything I could to protect it and make it better. And I just appreciate you all being so forthright and being so cooperative and trying to help us come up with solutions, which you did. Mm-hmm. And appreciate that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And when you talk about cost of prevention, cost of treatment, it's also, there's going to be costs of litigation. It's a real hot topic in trial lawyer circles right now, and who's responsible for what. And I'm sure the courts are going to tell us some of that at some point. But we need to be as proactive as we can and anticipate rising costs in every aspect, because those litigation costs are going to be passed on. So those are just some things from a budget standpoint that we need to be familiar with. And we always, not because I'm a former prosecutor, natural resources and water, but we've always underfunded them. I mean, there's not enough of them and not enough money there now. This is going to be something that we need to look at, increasing their budget. We need to, because the federal regulations are forthcoming. When we got in South Shore, we couldn't, there's no notice requirement to tell people they were being exposed. There was no notice requirement, people. And that's a problem. I think we all have the right to be notified when we're dealing with the commodities that's necessary for life. And those are just things that we've lived through lately that I don't want to go through again, and I certainly don't want anybody to. But we do appreciate what you all did and the continuing effort on the budget that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Webb.
Excuse me, and last we have Representative Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all so much for this presentation. It's very timely, and we need to act quickly. I'm sure you agree. My question relates to your proposal in addressing drinking water. I think that makes sense. That seems to be consistent with what the EPA is doing, and so I'm glad that we're looking in all directions to find the right methods. Because the cost of implementing water purification through carbon is going to be significant.
Yes.
Are there any sort of interim things that the legislature could do in terms of making filtration levels possible at a smaller level? Can we provide our constituents with home-based carbon purification systems? Could we do something like that until we're able to address it at a better, larger scale?
Well, certainly there will be and will continue to be processes, technologies, and vendors who are going to build potential business models on addressing PFAS, and particularly in the home. Home use filters are always an option, although they're not all created equal. So I would encourage those who have an opportunity to perhaps look at using those. We have a lot of information that we've collected. You'll see a little bit later in our presentation where the public can get some idea of what might be in the finished drinking water in their location. And that might drive them one way or the other to say, maybe I need to take another look at this and maybe what I can do in the interim. And as we move along the presentation, I'm going to have at least some general information on what drinking water facilities might be looking at in terms of cost and technologies. So I think in the meantime, there's always that balance and it's oftentimes a personal decision. But if there's options available and people feel like they need to avail themselves of them, then I would encourage them to do so.
Thank you.
Yes.
Tony, thank you for accommodating so many sort of questions
Sure.
midway through your presentation. We are running a little bit late on time, so if we've asked questions or covered it, that you may be able to skip over those parts as you go forward, then please go ahead.
Yeah, we'll zoom ahead. So just to give you a little bit of idea, and these are really, rough numbers at this point. This is potential cost of drinking water facilities to address PFAS. We have a facility in Litchfield, drinking water facility, that's asked for funding to put granular activated carbon in their treatment train. You know, granular activated carbon works, but you have to have enough of it and enough residence time to reduce. We're talking about really low levels here. I think in their cost estimate, they're looking at 120,000 pounds of granulated aquifer or granulated carbon in 3 containers of 40,000 pounds apiece. That's about $1 million startup cost. That's an add-on to their existing treatment facility. And the thing about carbon, it's great stuff, but once the receptors get filled, it doesn't want to hold on to anything anymore. You have to regenerate it or replace it. So there's be ongoing costs. That's just a rough number that we've seen from a drinking water facility. That second bullet there, through the state revolving fund, and those are federal dollars that come to the state for the state to distribute for projects. Emerging contaminants has become one of the criteria on which needs might be ranked. And for example, in 2024, SRF requests were around $115 million. Now, that's not a lot of detail. That doesn't mean that's $115 million of just treatment trains. There may be times when a facility says, hey, I think I may have this issue with emerging contaminants, but I'd like to just go ahead and build a new plant. So I don't think we could say that's $115 million worth of actual treatment train costs, but that gives you an idea of what some of the drinking water facilities are thinking about as they're looking out into the future and seeing what requirements may come to them and trying to get ahead of that. So I'll move real quick. In 2019, we did our initial finished drinking water. This is all finished drinking water that comes out of the spigot. We studied 81 facilities across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I'll show a map here in a minute, but we saw a predominance of PFAS compounds in drinking water facilities along the Ohio River Basin. And as Senator Webb mentioned, South Shore, Kentucky was one that sort of stood out above the crowd a little bit. And to Mayor Moore's credit, she worked with us, and we've worked to get a little bit better situation up there now. Actually, quite a bit better situation, because she was interested in getting out ahead of it, and we were interested in helping her do that. So this is a case of where us going out and collecting data, we found something that was a little bit different than what we normally found. Their numbers were quite a bit higher. They've got a groundwater system up there, old groundwater wells. At that point, it's not really that important to know where it's coming from. It's how do we treat it, or how do we remove it from the citizens that are drinking it. Since then, we've gone out and sampled the remaining 113 drinking water plants in the state. This map here sort of shows that the red squares are where this is, in many cases, this is just one piece of data. And so one piece of data is not a story make. In some cases, we've actually collected some additional data, but this may give you an idea of what we found. The red squares are at or above a draft MCL, and I'll talk about what an MCL is in a minute. It's a maximum contaminant level. There's a draft MCL out there that EPA has proposed, 4 parts per trillion for PFOA, PFOS. And that's detected at levels that exceed that draft MCL, which is currently still not yet the law. The blue colored squares are whether it's at or above a health advisory. This is what I mean by that. This is going to be a little bit of a risk communication challenge for everybody, because we can detect it in our lab down to 4 parts per trillion, but we can actually see it at levels less than 4 parts per trillion. But what happens is once it gets down to those lower levels, we can't quantify it. We can say, yeah, it's there, but we couldn't quantify it. We couldn't defend it if we had to use it for whatever purposes, but it's still, it shows up on our instrument. So you can see that where those blue squares are is where we have very low numbers that are above EPA's current health advisory for these compounds, one of which is 4 parts per quadrillion, which is basically 0. And where you see a few of the purple blocks is where we detected PFAS, but other PFAS, not the PFOA and the PFOS. And in the green squares, the more of those we can find, the better we like it, or where we got no detections above a detection limit from our lab. We did all these samples ourselves, and we've gone back to a few of these locations and re-verified some things. In Kentucky, we have our drinking water facilities get their source water from surface water and from groundwater aquifers, particularly down to Jackson Purchase along the Ohio River alluvial valley, they're more likely to get their source water from groundwater. We have a couple of groundwater systems down in western Kentucky that we found very low levels of PFAS in. Frankly, being a hydrogeologist, I was a little surprised by that. It just sort of speaks to the mobility of these compounds once they're released into the environment. So that's sort of a snapshot of where we're at on the drinking water system. That data will be used and can be used, and drinking water systems were more than glad for us to collect it on their behalf. That data is data they can use to try to do some planning moving forward as to about what they might have to do. Do they need to start planning ahead, looking at perhaps treatment costs and those types of things? That's the reason for which we gathered that information. Along the way, we did find the one location Senator Webb spoke to us about, and the city, we helped them work on solving that issue sooner rather than later.
And there's something I would add to that, is that from a management perspective, when you look at most of the areas that are above that draft MCL, the interior of the state, most of those are not showing that they are above that draft MCL. So if EPA were to finalize a maximum contaminant level, this will help those facilities to identify whether, and for you to see what the impact would be to the water systems within Kentucky. And since most of these are along the Ohio River, we're fortunate in Kentucky, we don't have a lot of facilities that manufacture these chemicals. And so a lot of that beyond the Ohio River, that's not necessarily Kentucky facilities that are impacting those levels. The Ohio River, drains a good part of the eastern United States. So it's all.
Sure. We've also done, to Senator Smith, to get to a question you asked a few minutes ago, we've done some surface water sampling, which is all surface waters are potential sources for drinking water facilities. We sampled 40 surface waters in the state. We found detects of PFAS in 36 of those samples. That will become part of our occurring ambient sampling program. We've also collected fish tissue data from lakes and rivers across the state. To date, all the fish samples that we've collected and analyzed for have had detects of particularly PFOS, which is one of the PFAS compounds that tends to accumulate in fish. And you can see all that information in the reports that we have tagged here, but we've seen it in lakes and rivers. Strangely, some of the highest concentrations that we've seen is in lakes was Kentucky Lake and Tennessee Lake, and we've been wondering if there are potential sources in Tennessee or northern Alabama that might be adding to that. We work with our friends at Fish and Wildlife, and what we've done, because we understand the value of consuming fish and recreational fishing. There were already some fish tissue advisories for mercury that have been posted for a long time in Kentucky fisheries, and we added just the notification to those fish advisories that PFAS is also present, and you should consider, if you choose to follow those fish consumption advisories that have already been established. Over time, we hope that the lessening of sources to surface waters will ultimately see a decrease in concentrations in fish tissue. We certainly don't want to see it going the other way. This is a list here, and you remember my sources, pathways, exposures example. This is a list of potential sources across the state. This is not finger pointing. This is all pretty much public information. There's things called NAICS codes or SIC codes that define certain types of activities for which PFAS might be related or managed or something such as that. One of the reasons that we're looking at these types of facilities and where they may occur at present point in time is to determine if we have perhaps, a preponderance of domestic well users in an area that might be being potentially impacted. Domestic use wells they're not regulated like a municipal well or like a municipal water source. We're in the early stages of that. That's all very preliminary. But we're also, the whole purpose of that activity is simply to try to ascertain if we have some citizens in some places that might be being exposed to higher levels and don't know it. So I think that's the end of the presentation.
Very good. We have two last questions here. Representative McCool, we'll yield to you at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Have you, this chart that you sent out showed us, has that been communicated with the local water and rural water association? The local water departments, they have this?
They do. When we collect a sample from their location, we send them the results.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And we have Representative Wesley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. I've been in several meetings about dredging the rivers and creeks. I remember that they used to do that a lot. I heard you mention about that you was doing some kind of sampling for the surface. Would dredging help, since that all the settlements is going to the bottom of the rivers and creeks? If we dredge the rivers and creeks, would that help with our water issue?
It likely wouldn't help with this water issue. Because PFAS is so soluble, it's in the water. You know, unlike some contaminants we used to deal with years ago that tended to settle out and get in the sediment, PFAS doesn't really like to do that. It stays in solution and it likes to run basically right with the water.
These chemicals do not bind to organic matter. If it gets in the soil, it just continues to run.
Would dredging help in any other testing that you're not talking about today? Would that help our water, drinking water?
Well, if there's a capacity issue where your intake is getting to a position where it might not have sufficient water, I suppose it could. But right off the top of my head, Representative Wesley, I'm not aware of anything that I could say that it would immediately or that you could make a nexus where it would help water quality. I mean, there are other reasons for doing that, and making sure you're doing it responsible so you don't adversely impact water quality while you're doing it.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, very good. Tony, thank you all for coming. Obviously, there was a lot of questions about it. We appreciate you commenting on each one of those. It shows this is an important issue to this body, and the issues brought up by Representative Smith is one that we really want to follow, and we appreciate the heads up on that. I know Senator Gerber to me early on it and asked us to kind of take a look into this. So hopefully this is a shot across the bow for us to be able to engage with you all to be helpful for what's coming before we have a problem, not so much after. But with that said, thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Appreciate your presentation. The last thing we have, committee, is the Fish and Wildlife. These are referred administration regulations. There's no real action required from us, but I encourage you to take a look in your packet and read some of the stuff in here that have been proposed. And since we have this here, Commissioner Storm, is there anything you'd like to add about, is he still in the room on this issue? I don't see him. I think he might have stepped out, but with this said, take a look at this so you're familiar. And do we have any other questions or comments by any of our members on the committee? Chairman Gooch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As most of your members know, this committee meeting is a little bit later. So our next meeting will be 2 weeks from today, which is not a lot of time between meetings. And we're going to hear from the PJM about about reliability as far as the electric grid. Should be a very interesting discussion. So thank you, Mr.
It is. So please make note of that. Also, as with the members that we have, if there's something in your district that you're learning about or it's important to you, please come to us as your chairman and speak to us if you'd like to have a chance to address that issue here, sometimes shed light on it or assist it. So please keep that in the back of your head that this is a good place to bring something that we may be able to help you specifically with in your region. With that said, I'll yield back.
No, back to me. I was referring to Representative Wesley's question about dredging some of our rivers and lakes. And when I was mayor 40 years ago in my community, we had the Tradewater River really did need that type of dredging. And that was my first active involvement with Fish and Wildlife. And I can tell you they were the biggest impediment to us trying to get that lake dredged. So good luck to you on that.
Oh, and the dredging right now in the flooded areas is critical because this area is filled back up with sediment, and if we have another big storm, we'll have flooding far worse than what we've already had. But with this said, let's wrap up. Do I have a motion to adjourn?